Thank you very much. Perhaps I should confess that I was a little apprehensive about accepting Professor Samantha Rayner's kind invitation to talk to you, as I had assumed wrongly that the Bookselling Research Network is devoted to those in new bookselling and publishing. But Samantha reassured me that we all share a common interest in the history, practice, and culture of bookshops and bookselling. And I hope that more than a few of my observations this afternoon will have some resonance for those engaged in the trade in books, old and new. By way of background, my interest in rare books dates from student days when I belonged to an undergraduate society for book collectors. As I was studying for a deeply unvocational degree in Hebrew and Syriac, it occurred to me that I should look for work in the world of rare books. I came down from university in 1979, just as the UK was entering an economic recession that came to be known as the Winter of Discontent. It wasn't the ideal time to be job hunting, but after writing to 49 second-hand bookshops up and down the country, the 50th, Marlborough Rare Books in London, gave me my first job. It was there that I met the dealers and collectors whose passion, eccentricity, and expertise inspired the idea that perhaps I might one day write about them. When someone told me that nobody grows up saying that they want to be an antiquarian bookseller, it increased my curiosity to learn more about the human side of the rare book trade, how my colleagues got into it, and once there, how they made it work for them. The opportunity came in 1991 when I was commissioned by Barry Shaw, the editor of the Bookdealer, a weekly trade newspaper, to write a series of interviews with leading figures in the business. When the paper ceased publication in 2010, I was invited by the book collector to continue my interviews in their pages. It's a quarterly journal, and it was founded by Ian Fleming of James Bond fame, who owned it from 1955 until his death in 1964. The current editor is David Pearson, a distinguished librarian and past president of the Bibliographical Society. The interview project continues to this day, and I've so far published 3 collections in book form. What I didn't realize at the outset of the project was that our working lives were about to be transformed by technological developments. When I set out to interview my first subject in March 1991, it's fair to say that bookselling as an activity had hardly changed since the invention of printing. Although Tim Berners-Lee and his colleagues were already experimenting with a prototype of the World Wide Web, none of my interviewees, I'm quite sure, had any idea of the turbulent times of online commerce not so far over the horizon. Through this accident of timing, the interviews in my first book, published in 2004, span a decade in which the trade was on the cusp of unprecedented change. The coming of the internet was just one of a number of factors contributing to the disappearance of a great many much loved and old established second-hand bookshops from our high streets. Other factors include the rise in business rates, the fall in library budgets, and competition from charity shops, which continue to some extent to affect every type of rare book business, from large firms to sole traders. 10 years later, the interviews in my second book, published in 2014, reflect the extent to which the trade has adapted to that perfect storm and found new ways of selling old books. My third collection of interviews was published last year, and by its inclusion of many more overseas booksellers, reflects the huge benefit that I've personally derived from new technology. I call the booksellers in my last volume Generation Zoom, as video conferencing enabled me to interview far-flung colleagues whom I might never have met in person, and their experiences give an all-important international dimension to the project. Since the pandemic forced me and so many others to become a little more tech-savvy, I've had the pleasure of interviewing booksellers in Argentina, Australia, France, Italy, Japan, the Netherlands, South Korea, Spain, Turkey, and the United States. I must say this has been a rather longer introduction than I intended, but I hope that it set the scene for some of the observations that I've gathered from those conversations. To begin perhaps with the popular perception of a second-hand bookseller, I would say it usually includes some element of eccentricities. When Lawrence Worms, I don't know, Eben, but this might be my first photo. Yes, thank you very much. When Lawrence Worms took over Ash Rare Books in London in 1971, the previous owners advised him to cultivate eccentricity because people expect it in a bookseller. Lawrence told me that he hadn't consciously done so, but it probably came out in years of handling books. As Lawrence said, you do eventually acquire a slightly distorted view of the world, perhaps by looking at it too often from an 18th or 19th century perspective. According to Robin Waterfield, who is the next slide, thank you. Robin had opened a vast second-hand bookshop on 4 floors in Oxford in the mid-1970s. His staff was so eccentric that a customer had been prompted to ask him if it was a bookshop or an occupational therapy centre. As for booksellers' perception of their customers, George Orwell summed up the attitude of a certain type of bookseller who is, in my experience, no longer with us. But according to Orwell, while he worked part-time at Book Lovers Corner, a second-hand bookshop in Hampstead from 1934 to 1936, during that time he observed that many of the customers were the kind who would be a nuisance anywhere but have special opportunities in a bookshop. Coincidentally, the first person I interviewed was Peter Eaton. Another slide coming up. Peter had begun bookselling from a barrow in Portobello Road in 1945 before moving on to greater things and premises. Peter told me that he didn't believe in the personal touch. Customers either want a book or they don't, and the best thing you can do is leave them alone. Fortunately, this this sort of caricature of the grumpy old bookseller guarding access to a back room in which they keep their best stock was becoming a thing of the past when I embarked on my interview project. Otherwise, I think I would have been quite quickly discouraged. Eric Moore, who is the next slide, he belonged to the same generation as Peter Eaton and had begun his career in the second-hand department of Hatchards in London shortly after the Second World War. He remembers being instructed by a colleague not to talk to customers unless there was money at the end of it. Eric ignored the advice and went on to run a delightful bookshop in Hitchin, Hertfordshire, where I interviewed him in 1995. The shop was a perfect example of the dying breed of provincial second-hand bookshops and is now a rather boring block of flats. The disappearance of bricks and mortar businesses is one of the recurring concerns in my conversations with booksellers. The loss of a physical location is not only lamented by customers, but also by newcomers to the book trade. Compared to the experience of my generation, apprenticeships hardly exist today. I spent 7 years with Marlborough Rare Books, and although no one described it as a formal apprenticeship, I gradually progressed from packing books to writing about them. It was an invaluable experience, and although there were many times when I thought I might never get out of the packing room, I'm grateful to have been introduced to every aspect of the business. Many of the booksellers whom I've met believe that the best way to learn the trade is by doing it. In Japan, the legendary Mitsuo Nitta of Yushodo described his training as, oh, I think there's a slide, I'm sorry, there's a slide of Mr. Nitta. Thank you. He described his training as quite simply watching the boss. It's striking how many of my interviewees began their careers by dusting the stock. The late Anthony Rota, who, with his father Bertram Rota, helped establish the international market for modern first editions of British writers, did his share of dusting, and without complaint. As he explained to me, if you keep dusting the same book, you learn something about supply and demand. Clive Farahar, who's another, thank you. Clive Farahar, whose face may be familiar from the BBC's Antiques Roadshow, spent his first month with the booksellers Francis Edwards dusting the shelves in the travel department and found it a good way to become acquainted with the subject for which he is now best known. A slide of Bogislav Winner. Bogislav is a German bookseller who's based in London, and he told me about his experience with Maria Conrad of the Bücher Cabinet in Hamburg from 1983 to 1985. Dr. Conrad's business was one of the last in Germany to offer a formal apprenticeship, during which Bogislav learned not only about books, but about bookkeeping. It used to be said that most booksellers were not good businessmen. In their defense, bookselling tends to defy most of the laws of economics and to baffle and frustrate the average bank manager. Against all the rules of accountancy, a successful rare book dealer often carries a large stock and has a slow turnover, and still manages to achieve comparatively high profit margins. According to Larry Eilott, who is another slide, of Kovnar books, the secret comes down to risk, time, and knowledge, from which you will gradually learn to buy at the right price and sell at the right price. Larry spent 30 years as a librarian before taking voluntary redundancy in 1995 to set up his own business. Although he would have liked the opportunity of an apprenticeship, he was obliged, as he put it, to buy his own experience. The rare book world has been reacting, I think, quite successfully for some time to the problem of disappearing opportunities for apprenticeships. Internships have been around for some years, but in reality, they're usually only available at a few of the larger firms. In the absence of more conventional routes into the trade, there have been a number of initiatives to provide practical education for young booksellers. In 2007, the Antiquarian Book School Foundation, little technical issue. The Antiquarian Book School Foundation was established in the States as an independent, non-profit institution building on the success of the Colorado Antiquarian Book Seminar. Their mission is to create collaborative networks and offer professional education to not only booksellers, but also librarians, archivists, and collectors. In 2014, the American efforts inspired the antiquarian book trade in the UK to found the annual York Antiquarian Book Seminar, which has become a huge success, and its graduates may be found throughout the trade and always speak highly of their experience. The National Association of Antiquarian Booksellers in France recently founded a training program for rare book professionals. And back home in London, the venerable firm of Maggs Brothers now offers a scholarship for the history of the book, the master's program at the Institute of English Studies. Apart from covering the academic fees, the scholarship includes the opportunity of an internship at Maggs. Meanwhile, the International League of Antiquarian Booksellers is justly proud of its mentoring program. It's designed to lend a hand in the early days of a bookseller's career when help is most needed. One of its most influential supporters is Sally Burden of Asia Book Room in Canberra, Australia, who firmly believes in the importance of helping future generations of booksellers now that so many traditional routes are no longer available. Sally also believes that the loss of so many physical bookshops makes connectivity all the more important. Gone are the days when you could just pop into a colleague's shop, have a chat, hear the latest gossip, and generally keep in touch. When I interviewed Fuchsia Forenberg, I think I've skipped, thank you. I skipped Sally Burden, I'm sorry, but this is Fuchsia of Maggs. When I interviewed Fuchsia shortly after her appointment as managing director of Maggs, she described the closure of many independent bookshops in the wake of online bookselling as an awful period. A firm believer in the importance of physical bookshops, Fuchsia is passionate about making them feel like destinations, serving the community by hosting events that bring like-minded people together, something that many new bookshops are doing brilliantly. I would say that without exception, all of my interviewees would agree with Peter Budek, who is a slide, Peter's statement that customers enjoy the physical experience of hands-on browsing Peter runs the Eagle Bookshop in Bedford, a thriving second-hand business in the centre of a provincial town. He's certainly bucking the trend and firmly believes that people prefer to browse in the corners of a bookshop than in the margins of a screen. One of the most frequent criticisms of online bookselling within the rare book trade is that it made everyone a bookseller overnight. I'm referring to the copy and paste newcomers who, with no previous experience of their own, began selling books online with inaccurate or over-optimistic descriptions due to their ignorance of the paramount importance of copy-specific details. In extreme cases, they would borrow the description of a most desirable copy of a particular work and apply it to their vastly inferior copy. When I interviewed Angus O'Neill, and I think we've got a slide of Angus about 50 years younger, but Angus O'Neill of the Omega Bookshop in London, whom I interviewed in 2002, Angus acknowledged that the impact of the internet had been huge, but added with his usual wisdom that it couldn't turn bad booksellers into good ones. The risk of plagiarism is not the only concern for online bookselling. In common with many colleagues, Michael Graves Johnson, who's the next slide, a specialist in books on Africa, regrets the loss of face-to-face contact. In his experience of selling online, you make a sale, but you don't make a customer. For dealers faced by economic necessity to give up a shop, the impersonal nature of doing business online can be lonely and frustrating. They often mention missing the pleasure of meeting customers and indeed nurturing their collecting interests in an environment where they can perhaps show 1 or 2 or 3 different copies of the same work. If Helen Hanff of 84 Charing Cross Road fame had lived in the digital age, it's been said that Marks and Company could have supplied all her desiderata in a matter of minutes. It's an exaggeration, but from the customer's point of view, the internet has made it possible to do a lifetime's browsing in a very short time. Many book buyers, as opposed to bibliophiles, have obviously benefited enormously from electronic efficiency, but less so perhaps in the case of book lovers, for whom the thrill of the chase is a major motivation. Chris Denniston, another photo. Chris began his career in the Portobello Road in the early 1970s. The son of a racehorse trainer and gambler, Chris believes that the internet kills every book stone dead, because the essence of collecting is the pursuit of the elusive and the wow factor of finding it. The late Peter Scupham, another photo, of Mermaid Books in Norfolk, came from a very different stable. A distinguished poet and fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, Peter believed that there was nothing so common as a rare book in the age of the internet. In his words, if you want a first edition of The Anatomy of Melancholy, the only thing that might stop you is not finding it, but paying for it. John Windle, another photo, please. An antiquarian bookseller in San Francisco, who is an authority on the works of William Blake, believes that the virtual nature of the digital age does not inspire confidence when dealing in high-value material. He acknowledges that the internet is a fantastic tool for exposing people to the world of rare books, but believes that buying from a website is no substitute for visiting a dealer in their shop or office. Trust is an essential ingredient in any customer-dealer relationship and is ideally developed in person over a period of time. Whenever I interview book collectors, they mention the importance of that relationship. The late Diana Scares-Brick, and there's a photo of her. Diana was a distinguished historian of jewellery and a great book collector. And she believed that the quality of your collection is determined by your choice of dealer. Collectors need an additional pair of hands and eyes working on their behalf. A good dealer will interest himself in one's collection and use his intelligence and imagination to broaden its scope. The alternative, as John Windle sees it, is to do business on a stranger's website that could disappear at the press of a button. Although I've dealt at some length on the challenges facing the trade, in terms of job satisfaction, my impression is that book selling scores very highly, and understandably so. Several interviewees have spoken of the pleasure of placing a book in the right hands, perhaps resulting in the discovery and preservation of something that had been unappreciated. I don't think it's too pompous to claim that the trade plays a vital part in preserving knowledge for future generations. Paul Goldman, and I think there's a photo, an expert on Victorian illustrated books, spoke for many of his colleagues when he said, ultimately, we have the opportunity to give pleasure, and this is surely one of the most worthwhile aims in life. One of the recurring themes in my conversations is the unanimous belief in the survival and enduring appeal of the book as a material object. Technology plays a very important role in our lives, but I'm not particularly pessimistic about the future of the rare book trade. A sense of permanence is one of the major casualties in our age of single-use and disposable products. Many of my interviewees have commented on the comfort to be found in the permanence of material books. This aspect of printed books was most poignantly put by William Poole. I think we have a photo of William Poole. Thank you. William is believed to be the first person to have become a bookseller despite being blind since birth. William entered the trade with the help of a loan from the Royal National Institute of Blind People, where he had worked as an editor in Braille publishing. With the help of an amanuensis, William developed a respected business, specializing in the history of classical scholarship. When I interviewed him in 2013, we talked about Google's project to create a monumental digital library of the world's rare books. It was at a time of much talk about the death of the printed book, and William was keen to point out the fragility of digitized text. As he put it, we don't know yet how long these technologies will last or how stable they are compared to what we know about the durability of parchment and paper. When I asked the late Alfredo Breitfeld And I think there's a photo of Alfredo with his wife, Susanna. Or maybe there isn't.
No, I don't have one.
Okay, sorry. Right. No, Alfredo. Alfredo was a distinguished bookseller in Argentina, where his son continues the business. I asked Alfredo if he thought the printed book was dead. He replied, "I cannot imagine a time when one of my customers will start to tremble, holding in their hands an electronic version of Don Quixote." Now that digital libraries have made so many texts available at the press of a button, booksellers are sometimes asked why we still need the material objects. And the answer is precisely because they are objects. Roger Gaskell, now I think there's a photo of Roger. Or maybe not.
That's all the images I've got. Or that's the 21.
Oh, okay. Well, no, Roger, I'm afraid. But anyway, Roger makes an impressive case for the defense of these objects by comparing books to an archaeological site. Each layer has significance and meaning. On the substratum of paper, with its inked impressions of type, are deposited the evidence of the book's manufacture, of the way the book was handled and read, how it moved from place to place, how it was understood and appreciated by contemporary and later owners who all left their mark on it. In other words, for the antiquarian book trade and its customers, the book is something much more than the text. It might be the binding, the provenance, the illustrations, the marginalia, and any number of other copy-specific details, which are often at the mercy of the scanning process in digitization projects. Roger Gaskell was for many years the right-hand man of Sir William Rees-Mogg when the latter owned Pickering and Chatto. Roger now works from home in Wales and specialises in rare books on science and medicine. For a purist, such as Roger, the single random copy of a book available on a database, reduced to 2 dimensions and scaled to a uniform size, is not a sufficient representation of the wealth and variability of the printed book. He also cautions that, in general, programs of mass digitization tend to be driven by commercial rather than bibliographical considerations. The copy available for scanning might not be the best, but simply the most convenient. It might have pages missing or be too blurred to read, which is a common fault in electronic books created from microfilm. And the person doing the scanning might also not be the best. It's not unusual to find that folding maps and illustrations in a digitized book have not been opened and therefore not scanned. You might expect someone of my generation to see more cons than pros when it comes to electronic books, but I'm interested to discover that my young colleagues who were born digital, so to speak, and grew up in the online world, have their own reservations. We've already met Fuchsia from Maggs Brothers, an outstanding representative of the talented younger generation in the rare book trade. Fuchsia explained to me that some of her contemporaries have a completely different relationship to material objects. Their parents might have had shelves full of books revealing their tastes and interests, but they have a digital library, password protected, on their phone. It's a very different form of possession which Fuchsia describes as a huge shift in ownership and not necessarily for the better. In fact, she believes that the young are increasingly discovering the value of owning physical media as a way of externalizing things. Of course, books do furnish a room, but more importantly, the selection on your shelves is the reflection of your inner life, helping to make the space uniquely yours. Things are changing too fast to predict, or at least for me to predict, what the rare book trade will look like in another generation. But I believe that there are plenty of reasons to be optimistic. New working practices have been embraced and the computer put to work at what it does best, namely the retrieval and dissemination of information. The impression that I've gained from talking with members of the global trade is that there will always be dedicated dealers at all levels to look after an equally persistent group of dedicated collectors. After all, the passion to possess books is the only field of collecting to have a disease named after it, bibliomania. And for that condition, there's no tablet. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was great. I'm going to try and stop sharing my screen now if I can. Have we? No. This is weird. Stop sharing. There it goes. Got it. Thank you. It was lovely hearing all those voices. And
well, thanks for looking after the photos.
That was a great tour. We have time for questions if anyone wants to jump in with anything. Yeah. Dave? You're mute. I can't hear you, Dave.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. It's the first time I've used Microsoft Teams. I'm a little flustered by it.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah, thanks, Sheila. I've read your columns as in the Bookdealer as a second-hand bookseller till a couple of months ago when I sold my business left on the shelf. And I specialize in radical books, new and second-hand. I'm doing research into it. And I wondered whether any of your articles or books have anything about any radical second-hand book dealers. I've come across one on Diana Burford, an article, and the Hendersons, but there may be one or two more that I'm not aware of. And could I just say that I still think you can discover things on the net, and even when you don't know what they are when you buy them. I mean, I got a book last week that I think is the best radical children's book I've ever come across, called The Little Squatter's Handbook. And I had no idea what to expect. And it's full of the most brilliant images, photo montages, and wonderful rhymes for children who may be with parents involved in squats. That's the original idea. And I also came across, not so long ago, a book published by the Hendersons, the family who had the shop in London, which was later taken over by Collins. And I found a pamphlet published by them in the early 20th century by someone called Phil Penisoplut. Now, I suppose that's a pseudonym, but I don't know. But it's a very rare little pamphlet. So anyway, that's what I wanted to ask you.
Well, thank you. As regards a possible bookseller whose reminiscences or experience might be slightly relevant to you. Have you come across Carl Williams?
Yes, yeah, but I haven't seen anything by him.
Well, I have interviewed him, and if you'd like, I'd be very happy to send you a copy.
Yeah, please.
I must say, in my experience, he's the only one I think that could perhaps interest you. I mean, he specializes in counterculture. Does that sound congenial?
Yes, it's sort of connected a bit on the periphery for me, but I am interested. Yeah, yeah.
And as for still being able to find things on the net or online, yes, of course, yes, absolutely. And many of the booksellers who really regret the days of visiting bookshops and are not sitting in front of a screen all day. Of course, they say they find things online. They just don't particularly find it the best business model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can I ask, following up on that, about book scarcity? I was talking to Greg Gibson years ago in 10-pound books in Gloucester about he was been in the business 20 plus years, and he talking about the effect of the internet on his business. It was his expertise, what he was good at was finding rare books. And now anybody could find a rare book just by going online. So the value of what he was doing, what he did for a living, he felt had changed. I'm just wondering, have other booksellers have you spoken to talked about scarcity?
Yes, they have. And some of them in the early days have been very sort of honest and said that when the internet came along and they discovered that there were hundreds of copies of a book that they had genuinely, in good faith, thought to be rare. It was like a kind of education. And, they realized that either you had, well, not all of them, but some of them, either you were going to survive by selling books in vast quantities, in quantity, or you'd have to try to specialize in much rarer materials so that the internet didn't keep showing you 30 or 40 copies.
Yeah, the way things have changed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do we have other questions? Anyone else?
I've got
Matthew?
one. Yeah, actually, just first thing, while you were speaking, my phone dinged and Mags had just sent me the new catalog. So I just, as, I think you had just mentioned them and then I got the notification. So they must be listening, I guess.
Yes, well, I'm sure the catalog is well worth reading.
I'm looking forward to it. I get my question was, since you have spoken to so many people, kind of one of my gripes, doing research on the history of bookselling is the kind of relative lack of archival records compared to like publishers, authors, other kind of book trade members. And I guess in speaking to everyone that you have, do you know of people who've been either approached by special collections or who have donated, or even think about kind of archiving their business records in a way for like posterity or for future research? Is that come up ever?
Yes, that's a very good question. Actually, no one that I've spoken to has ever mentioned taking an interest in their working papers and just their day-to-day archives and old catalogues, which I think is very sad. But I assume that the larger companies, Mags and Quaritch and Harringtons and, and so on, just to mention London, they're aware of the research value of their archives, but I don't know if they've actually made any plans for them.
I know the British Library has the it's uncatalogued or mostly uncatalogued. I forget which mags person I spoke to. The junior mags. I forget his first name. The
Ben,
younger mags.
could it be
Ben?
Ben?
I think it was Ben. Yeah. He'd mentioned that there is a large repository at the British Library that they're looking. I don't know how definite it was. This was a couple years ago, but that they would look at hoping that people would do research on. But
Yes.
yeah, but
And
yeah.
do you know the Grolier Club in New York?
Yes, yeah.
Well, they have an incredible collection of booksellers catalogues, and I think other papers, and they're keen for people to make use of them. And I think also at Cambridge University Library has collections, and the Bodleian.
Yes, I'm definitely tapping into it. I'm thinking kind of, moving forward outside of the larger entities, but that it is interesting that it doesn't get thought of more regularly. I mean, I don't have I'm not offering a solution to it. I just, if someone who has
Yes.
spoken to so many dealers that, yeah, it is interesting that it's kind of completely not an idea at all. But
Well, I can only encourage you to pursue it, because
yeah,
it's
we're
it's
trying.
interesting.
We're trying. I mean,
Yes, yeah.
to some extent, this is part of the effort with this,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah. Anyone else? Alexander?
Oh, thank you very much for the book, Sheila. Sorry, can you hear me okay? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I can. Thank you.
You mentioned Orwell early on, who's one of these people who gives rise to the notion of the curmudgeonly bookseller who doesn't really seem to want
Yes.
customers.
Yes.
But I mean, in my experience, I've never found that to be the case. I've never met a bookseller like that. Somebody suggested the booksellers have become more friendly compared to their precursors, but is it true, or is it just the idea of the bookseller who sees customers as a pest is just a myth?
Well, I can only see a tiny thumbnail of you, and you look far too young to have encountered the grumpy generation, because I assure you they did exist. And they were notorious for not letting you, well, just being extremely reluctant to sell a book. And especially if they didn't kind of rate you as a sort of serious collector, you wouldn't get to see where they kept their very interesting books. It's a handful, but they were, yes, they helped or hindered the trade, I think, in the image of being grumpy old men. And they were sort of immortalized in Ronald Searle. I don't know if you've come across Ronald Searle's Slightly Fox, this Slightly Fox cartoon of an elderly man in a moth-eaten tweed jacket, who is taken as, a second-hand bookseller, rare bookseller.
Well, I can tell you, I was raised by a secondhand bookseller in the 60s and 70s. And I remember him on a daily basis tolerating customers whom he did not want to tolerate. And sometimes he failed at the task.
Yes, no, I think I mean, obviously it wasn't widespread, but there was a general, a feeling that there were a slight interruption. But this has completely vanished from the trade today.
Yeah, you can't get away with it. If you are rude to a customer, they will go on Google and say how rude even if you're not nice enough to them, they will go up on Google and tell you that you weren't nice enough to them. Yeah.
Yes, but it's in my experience an extremely friendly, welcoming trade.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm glad to
absolutely.
say I've never encountered any of this old school of curmudgeon. Maybe if someone is exceptionally rude, they might get a useful Google review which will say, really a bookseller of the old school, go
There
to
we
him
go.
on the 1950s treatment.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, you could work for it, but I don't know.
Well, thank you. I'm going to go now myself because I've got a meeting at 3 o'clock. But
Well, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
There is
Thank you.
Yeah.
one book by a curmudgeonly radical book, ordinary bookseller called Eric Linklater. The title's Reflections from a Bookshop Window. And it's a very dispiriting book, and he plays on this trope of the misanthropic bookseller, and some of it is really depressing, but there's a very funny account of the book barrows in
Farringdon.
Harrington Road, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Talks about taking his kid there, and that is absolutely hilarious. He gives us an instruction to jump. As soon as somebody starts listening to talk, you dive, and it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a technique. All right. I think that finishes us off for the day. Thank you very much, Sheila. That was a lovely tour through these voices of these booksellers.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye now.
Goodbye. Bye.
Bye.